Thank you, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation. It's a recorded one and a very important one on the subject of effectiveness in fighting financial crime. This presentation is being made by the first chair of the coalition, having been elected by the members in October 2020. He was previously the global MLRO at the UBS and the Standard Chartered Bank, and a two-time co-chair of the Wolfsberg Group. He's an advisor to a number of financial institutions and a Reg-Tech providers, and engages with NGOs combating wildlife and human trafficking. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome and get ready for this video presentation by the chairperson of GCFFC and the former co-chair of Wolfsberg, Mr. John Cusack.
It's a great privilege for me to speak with you at your conference today, and grateful for this opportunity. Distinguished guests and conference organisers, thank you again. I lead the Global Coalition to Fight Financial Crime, which is made up of members that are committed not only to contributing to fighting financial crime, but leading the way on how we can do this better, more efficiently and effectively. We represent both public sectors and the private sectors, think tanks and civil society, that have come to the same conclusion, that frameworks that were designed decades ago in another age need urgent modernisation, that rules and legal changes are not enough to turn the tide, and that silos and individual actions need to give way to joint actions and increased collaboration. Why modernise now? Well, it's over 50 years since the US Bank Secrecy Act came into force, the first anti-money laundering focused legislation that required for the first time the private sector banks in the US to keep records of transactions of their customers and report some of these to the US government. This system has grown from its humble roots into what we see today, from drug trafficking to all crimes, and from looking for suspicious activity to now having to be concerned even with unusual activity. It's 40 years since sanctions were imposed on Iran, and we've seen over these 40 years, the imposition of further sanctions regimes, and in particular, the use of sanctions policed by the international financial system. This system has grown from economic sanctions for political reasons to sanctions for all manner of reasons, from drug trafficking and organised crime, terrorism, corruption, and human rights abuses. It's 30 years since FATF was established and only recently had its then 10-year extended mandate further extended indefinitely. The fourth round evaluations have revealed what we all knew for quite some time, that implementation of FATF standards is not what it should be, that everyone is doing badly, and that beyond technical compliance, where some countries seem to be doing better than others, level of effectiveness are much too low. By my own calculations, the average score for technical compliance, using a simple scoring model for compliance with the 40 recommendations, is around 70% compliant. For effectiveness scores against the FATF methodology, the average is below 40%. The consequences are that financial crime remains a top 10 global industry and arguably the most profitable, with success only a rounding error affecting those involved. The combinations of traditional organised crime with the extension to other criminal enterprises, where we are seeing an increase in fraud, tax evasion, human trafficking, illegal wildlife trafficking, and cyber-enabled criminality, will test our very limited successes even further. These developments should be of concern to everyone inside and outside of this conference. So, it's clear we have been at this a long time, and it's high time we ask whether we can do things better. That said, it's important to recognise that much of what has been done is helpful and is making a difference, just not the difference we had hoped for or expected by now. Prevention, detection, and reporting levels have never been higher. Levels of know your customer information have never been deeper. And the level of financial investment, resourcing expertise has never been as strong. These are important strengths. The problem is they're not delivering on the outcomes we all want. I say we all want, but is this even clear? Is there a clear purpose? Or are these really confused or too numerous and or even in conflict with each other? Are we aiming for a reduction in harms, or to take away the proceeds of crime, or to increase the risks to those conducting criminal activity, to prevent its activity or to detect it, to keep it out or to follow the money? Are we more focused on having as clean a financial system as possible, that regulated entities pass a rigorous compliance test, irrespective of how well they do on fighting financial crime? Or are we more focused on the risks of financial exclusion, the cost to consumers, and the rights of citizens to financial privacy? Depending on your role, whether as policymakers, supervisors, law enforcement, data protection officers, financial institution CEOs, chief risk officers, or compliance officers, you may have a different view. For what it's worth, at a Chatham House anti-financial crime conference last week, the FATF's executive secretary made the following statement, which has been publicly released by FATF on its website. He said, and I quote, "I don't know about you, but I'm fed up with protecting the integrity of the financial system. The truth is, I don't care about the financial system, so why should I care about the integrity of it? At this point, I should point out that saying this publicly is a little risky for me, and I know that sadly, thanks to the pandemic today, I'm not protected by the Chatham House rule. This may be a little detrimental to my job, as according to its mandate, protecting the integrity of the financial system is the point of the FATF. However, in a sense, that's my point, and I'm leading by example. As AML professionals, we all need to take more risks and stop just ticking the boxes. I don't know about you, but I don't go to work every day, or at least these days to the kitchen table, in order to protect the integrity of the financial system. I go to work," he said, "to help follow the money that fuels crime and terrorism, and to reduce the harm that causes to people and our planet." I'm with David Lewis on this, though having worked for 30 years in financial institutions, leading large financial institutions' anti-financial crime programs, I can say, at least for me, it's never been about just protecting the integrity of the financial system, though that in itself is a laudable aim, and protecting each of our own financial institutions is very important, of course, to each of us. But it's always been about preventing, detecting, reporting, and cooperating with law enforcement and intelligence agencies so they can do their jobs better, whilst safeguarding the interests of those that are inadvertently affected. The truth is, though, a lot of the time and effort goes into ticking the boxes, and whilst box ticking is not unimportant, and I would never advise any strategy of non or under compliance, if that's all you're doing, or mostly what you have no choice but to do, or there are real incentives to do otherwise, then it's no surprise we have ended up where we are today. It's therefore of utmost importance that we have a common purpose, that we have focused priorities, that these are clearly communicated, and that we measure success. The Global Coalition to Fight Financial Crime in February 2021 publicly announced the establishment of an experts working group on effectiveness, which is being led by Sir Rob Wainwright, former director of Europol, whose terms of reference require clarity on the overall purpose, on priorities, and on measures of success. We've established a number of streams looking at each major stakeholder group, from policymakers and the overall framework to law enforcement and FIUs, to large financial institutions and fintechs, and last but not least, focused on regulators. We will explore what has worked, what has not, and what could be achieved by doing things differently. This is not just a big conversation, it's the right conversation through a dialogue initially of true leading experts from all around the world that will lead to recommendations which we will present later this year. Whilst we have started with separate streams for these different stakeholder groups, we have to bring them all together so they fit like a jigsaw and make a unified approach at the end. We think we know what some of these answers look like, but we still need to have this big conversation. For example, why is there not more focus on G20 countries, which make up 85% of global GDP and 75% of international trade, and present by far the biggest financial crime risks, as opposed to ones that single out more often than not countries with less robust responses, but commensuratively much less risks? Can we make real progress on fighting financial crime if we don't at the same time also make real progress on fighting corruption, which is both a serious financial crime, but also facilitates and protects criminals and their assets from investigation, prosecution, and forfeiture? Are we spending enough in the right areas? For example, the average spend on policing and justice in many so-called advanced economies is below 1% of GDP and has been reduced over the last decade in real terms. Are we spending too much in the wrong areas? For example, Costs of compliance for financial institutions has been rising for decades and is well in excess of 1% of financial institution revenues or staffing, and in some cases even above 10%. Always largely ignoring one of the largest, least well understood or targeted methods of money laundering via trade, and focusing too much on one of the newest, which in comparison is much smaller when it comes to actual laundering via cryptocurrency. Are we responding to the threats of significant increased fraudulent activity supported by cyber means in a way that's commensurate with the risk? And why is the law enforcement response different to the response from cyber to cyber attacks? Are we making the most of the advances that we are seeing, working albeit in pockets, for example, through increased collaboration in public-private partnerships with greater information sharing, use of new technology and increased models of cooperation? Are we incentivizing behavior to generate outcomes we want, or are we beset with unintended consequences which call into question the benefits of the overall effort when judged against the costs? These are all big questions and ones that we all need answers to. I'm looking forward to facilitating these discussions and with those experts providing answers which can drive recommendations that will present us all with the opportunity to improve the overall effectiveness of our collective efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful and powerful.